Good morning, students. Today we are going to have the 11th lecture, which is as the students asked to discuss on balanced budget multiplier. So I am going to talk today the balanced budget multiplier and its effect in public finance perspective as well as from a macroeconomics perspective. So we know that what is actually balanced budget multiplier. We can this was originally popularized by Keynes, and there are many economists had talked about this. But this is actually something to do with the budgeting system. So if the economy is close to one, then the effect of balanced budget is almost predictable in that sense. But once the economy is not uh, uh, close to one, then the effect of balanced budget may not be as accurate as we think. So this is what is actually something which we need to keep in mind. However, there are economists even argue the reverse. So I don't want to basically go into that kind of discussion today. So let me come to the balanced budget multiplier. So according to Keynes, any increase in autonomous expenditure will have a multiplier effect. So government expenditure like autonomous investment also has a multiplier effect. What does it mean? So government is in fact increases a tax means it has its own effect, but when they spend that it has a different effect. So multiplier is always something to do with the expenditure which is an autonomously determined one. So which this is what is the importance. For instance, for a change in government expenditure, say G, we have an equation suppose delta y is equal to 1 by 1 minus b times delta g, or to say delta y by delta g, or 1 by 1 minus b. So this is what is normally in a textbook. If you open this, this is what is actually the equation you can find. So what does it mean? So for my mind, the most important thing is actually change in income of the economy is having an effect, or is actually related to the change in government expenditure. So this is what is roughly mentioned by 1 minus 1 1 by 1 minus b. So a policy controlled element of autonomous expenditure is tax, which is used to finance a government expenditure. Although taxes depend on income or its change, since government expenditure is financed largely by taxes, the two variables, that is government expenditure and taxes, are considered together while assessing the effect of G. For a change in tax, therefore we have the same, that is the, if your income is given, that is the delta y bar, which is equal to 1 minus 1 by 1 minus b times minus b delta t. In other words, change in income is actually dependent on change in tax, which is equal to minus b by 1 minus b. So this is actually the opposite of what we try to say. So the tax and the expenditure is being treated, in the opposite sense. That is, if the government is actually having tax, then only they can have an expenditure. So this is what is actually the idea. So in that sense, if it is, as I in the beginning point mentioned, that if it is a closed economy, then this tax is going to be anyway spent by the government. So the net effect in that sense is not necessarily anything which is very lucrative. So this is what is called the stationarity condition in that sense. So there are many many views regarding this thing, but we are not going to the details of that, because that is not in fact the discussion point. So in a nutshell, what I would like to articulate is, if a 1 rupee increase in G has the same effect on equilibrium income as a 1 rupee increase in I. So each implies a 1 rupee increase in autonomous expenditure. So each has the same multiplier effect. In each case, the initial increase in income generated induced increase in consumption. So through a multiplier effect. So this is what is actually the idea. So the effect of an increase in G can be shown exactly the same way as we have shown the effect of an increase in I. So the C plus I plus G0 schedule will shift to a C plus I plus G1, or in the next period G2. So you have this thing will be actually changing where G1 is equal to G plus delta G. So we can immediately depict the same with the help of the Keynesian cross, or what we call the expenditure diagram in that sense. So this is pretty standard, and you can refer in any textbook if you wish. So if G is in that, if suppose the delta G, that is the change in government expenditure, which is equal to the change in the income, Y and I will be the same, because change in income is equal to 1 by 1 minus B times delta G, which is equal to 1 by 1 minus B delta I. In that sense, investment multiplier and government expenditure multiplier are equal. Okay, so in this case, I is equal to G schedule will, sorry, in this case I plus G schedule will shift upward from I0 G0 to I0 G1, where G1 minus G0 is equal to AG, which is what is actually in the Keynesian cross. If you look at, you can understand. So the same is I minus I1 minus I0, that is equal to AI. So this is what is called the autonomous investment. So that is why there is a shift takes place from the investment curve altogether. So since tax like savings are a leakage from the circular flow of an income, we see from earlier equation, that the effect of an increase in the tax is in the opposite direction to those of an increase in G or I. An increase in tax affects consumption spending by reducing disposable income, or which is Y minus T at any level of national income. So this is what is actually sorry, the point. So as a result, the aggregate curve shifts downwards at all level of national income. This is what is from a diagrammatic perspective one can illustrate. So to illustrate the effect of an increase in the tax on equilibrium income, if tax rises by a delta T rate from T0 to T1, the aggregate curve shift downwards. So if the aggregate curve shifts downwards, then the equilibrium point also changes. This is due to downward shift to the consumption schedule caused by a rise in tax. Equilibrium income falls from the Y bar 0 to Y bar 1. So the fall in income per rupee increase in tax is equal to the tax multiplier. That is what is called the minus B by 1 minus B. So this is what, thus if tax raises by an amount, then equal amount is going to be having in the economy, or to say in another sense, that equilibrium income falls by or increases by that minus B1 B times 1 minus B delta T. So in part B, if you check with the diagram, you can also see that the saving plus tax schedule shift upward from S plus T0 to S plus T1 at the new equilibrium point F dash. So the national income y1 is lower than it was at the original equilibrium. So if you check with any standard macroeconomic textbook, this can be easily understood. So it will be kind of triggering point to move what we try to see. So in a simple sense, that as I said earlier, so if it is a closed model having uh, no external or sort of export import and other things permitted, or without the control or kind of supervision, if anything nothing take place, then that sort of a situation, in that sort of a situation, this theory have actually a balanced effect. So if you tax and then there is a leakage, and if you invest, then that will be a boost, so that will cancel out. This is what is called the balance multiplier, so balance budget multiplier. But once if you say that one country is having an advantage of trade or any sort of openness, then things are not going to be that meticulously under control of any economy. But definitely for the central bank and all, or the government, they actually have a sort of assessment. Unless that assessment is actually uh, underestimated or overestimated, so that overestimation or underestimation is a product of the health of the economy or the presence of the black economy, or sort of underground economy, or etc. In India, for example, we know that actually larger part of the economic transactions are not being counted or taxed. So if that is the case, then that part portion of the transaction all goes underground. So if that is the case, then definitely we may be having, or we will be having a sort of imbalance, even if we have a proper sort of expenditure takes place in one side, or in a tax takes place on the other side. So the real effect of what is actually the government is doing in that context is not necessarily easy to understand. So it will be actually giving us a sort of complicated result. So there is a relation, therefore absolute values of tax and government expenditure multipliers the following example, or for example, if b is equal to zero point 0.5, and in the second case b is equal to 0.8. So in the first case 1 by 1 minus b is equal to 2, but in the second case 1 by 1 minus b is actually equal to 5. So the multiplier changes in that sense. So on the contrary, if you have a tax effect, then minus b by 1 minus b is equal to minus 1. At the same time, on the second case, you may be having actually an effect which is 1 minus b 1 minus b is equal to minus 4. That is, there is some sort of an advantage in that sense. Thus we see that this is also depends on the propensity to consume, because if the propensity to consume of the weaker section is high and the richer section is lower, then naturally if you introduce a tax of wealth and all, then that will only affect the sort of the income of the higher set, but at the same time the expenditure which will be incurred by the state having an effect on the weaker section or the lower stratum of the society, the poorer lot of the society, then that kind of that section will benefit because they have a very high level of propensity to consume. So in that sense, it is going to have a very different effect, which is normally called the consumption induced demand, or what you called consumption induced demand or supply. So that is called the acceleration effect. This is also going to produce by this simple expenditure, but this expenditure is on the other hand is actually increases the purchasing power of the people, and that naturally increases the demand for the commodity, and that makes the suppliers to invest more, or the saved amount they may be going to invest in that part of their production frontier. So if that is the case, then definitely there is a positive effect in that sense, which is the acceleration can also be very positive, and the multiplier also play in. So multiplier normally in a nutshell act as a direct expenditure result of the autonomous expenditure, whereas the acceleration is a product of the consumption induced demand. So this is the difference between these two. So when any government policy uh, of tax or the expenditure is having in real economy two effect. So it's not one effect, it's definitely at least two effect, that is the multiplier and acceleration effect will be there. One is basically the direct expenditure one, and the other one is an indirect expenditure one, which is actually the in demand induced kind of thing. So this is what is actually in a nutshell, in a simplest sense we can understand the balanced budget multiplier. There are many equations. I am actually not concentrating on that, or I would like to give you what is this. So this is what is actually about balanced budget multiplier. I'll stop the presentation at this juncture. Thank you for your patience and listening. I hope the lecture is a little